They still cheer for him, not Sinner, the other one. Every time Jannik walks onto a court, Wimbledon, Roland Garros, Melbourne, New York, he enters a cathedral still echoing with hymns written for a man who no longer plays. The applause might be for him now, technically, but beneath it, you can hear it. The longing, the memory, the ache. He left a vacuum because Roger Federer didn't just leave tennis. He's expected to fill it. You don't just chase your own greatness, you do it in the shadow of something mythic. Federer wasn't a rival. He was a religion, and Jannik, quiet, methodical, driven. He's trying to build a legacy while everyone else is busy mourning someone else's. And Sinner? That's not just unfair, it's impossible. This is what it means to rise in a post-Federer world. He was 16 when Roger won his last slam, 17 when Federer began fading from the spotlight, but the headlines never stopped. Could Sinner be the next Fed? They started before the kid even grew into his serve, before his voice deepened, before he knew what pressure really meant. The irony? He never asked for the comparisons. He's not trying to be elegant. He's not trying to be poetic. Every tournament, every match, silent, sharp, steady. Not chasing Federer, but constantly haunted by him. And somewhere along the way, perfection became redefined not as dominance, but as elegance. He's trying to be brutal, efficient, surgical, and that's the problem. He hits clean, but he doesn't glide. He doesn't perform. His game is a scalpel, not a brushstroke. And in the theater of global tennis, that's a problem. Because fans don't just want results, they want a feeling. He's too cold for the romantics, too calm for the chaos, the focus for the fairy tale. In a post-Federer world, people don't watch to witness, they watch to remember. A wink, a tear, a story. They want that one-handed backhand that floated like silk. They want the walk, the wave, the tearful goodbyes. But when Sinner wins, it's quiet. He's dissecting the game while the world is still trying to romanticize it. From the toss to the trophy, every motion carried metaphor. And now, fans demand the same from Sinner whether he likes it or not. Federer had luxury, Sinner has utility. Federer was Lacoste, Rolex, champagne. Sinner is sweat, silence, structure, and in doing so, he fails an invisible test. He doesn't make people feel the way Federer did. Clinical. It sits on his shoulders during matches, where one missed volley is seen not as a technical error but as a failure to live up to Federer's ghost. Emotionless. It doesn't dance, it dominates. That's his crime. And it's not just fans. The arenas themselves betray him. The banners, the tributes, the commentators always tying his story back to a man who already had his ending. It's like Jannik is auditioning for a role in someone else's movie. Imagine that. You spend your entire life training for greatness, only to realize greatness was already defined, and you're not it. And yet, he shows up. He doesn't wear the crown, but he carries the coffin, and when he lifts a trophy, no one asks how hard it was. They ask if Roger would have made it look easier. They called Federer art in motion. They call Sinner efficient. That difference says everything. When Roger played, the world paused. Not because he was winning though he usually was, but because he made winning look like ballet. He floated. He painted lines. He smiled. Now every player who dares to rise must pass the aesthetic test. And Jannik Sinner, he never signed up for that. He hits hard. He could destroy an opponent in straight sets, walk off with barely a fist pump, and the crowd still waits for something else. But Sinner doesn't play for narrative. He plays to win. That, too, is his flaw. In press conferences, they ask him about grace.style.flair. He responds with statistics, strategies, spin percentages. Because Federer didn't just play tennis. He told a story. Even the brands notice, and that pressure, it doesn't just whisper, it screams. It follows him into training sessions where his form is critiqued not for effectiveness, but for beauty. And all the while, Jannik is trying to do something far more terrifying than emulate perfection. He is trying to define his own. But in this era, perfection has already been branded, sold, worshipped. And it doesn't look like him. He can win. He can dominate. But unless he transforms victory into art, the applause will always be half-hearted, because perfection isn't just about being the best anymore. It's about being unforgettable. And when you're following Federer, the world has already made up its mind about what unforgettable looks like. Every great era needs its clash. Borg-McEnroe, Sampras Agassi, Federer-Nadal. Rivalries build legacies. They define greatness. But what happens when you're cast into one that doesn't fit? That's what Jannik Sinner faces, because the sport wants a new war, a new binary, but all the lines are already drawn and they don't include him. The headlines want him to be the counterweight to Carlos Alcaraz, the icy, unshakable tactician to Carlos's flamethrower charisma. But it's not a rivalry, it's a schedule. There's no fire, no grudge, no emotional debt between them. But that narrative, it's synthetic, forced, manufactured by a media machine desperate to recreate the golden age. And Sinner knows it. He doesn't hate Alcaraz. He respects him. Sometimes they clash like titans. Other times, one walks over the other. Like the sport is trying to crown a new showman and Sinner keeps showing up dressed for a funeral. He's still winning, still roaring. And Sinner? He's stuck playing the understudy in a drama that hasn't ended yet. And every time Jannik faces him, the subtext is unbearable. The fans need a new Federer. The networks need a new Nadal-Djokovic clash. The sponsors need a storyline. Still, the pressure persists. Every time Alcaraz dazzles, Jannik gets framed as the problem to robotic, to quiet, to clinical. Meanwhile, Djokovic still looms, the gatekeeper of greatness, the villain for some, the machine for others. Can he finally take the torch? Will this be the passing of the crown? When Jannik Sinner wins, it's like a clock ticking in an empty room, precise, predictable, and mostly ignored. But Novak isn't interested in passing anything, because in the post-Federer era, winning is no longer about the scoreboard, it's about spectacle. And Jannik doesn't give the world spectacle, he gives results. He doesn't get to shape his own rivalries, the sport assigns them, not based on chemistry but on need. But Jannik doesn't play for the camera, a symbol, a savior. That comes loud, it comes fast, and it cuts deep. He doesn't scream at the crowd, he doesn't break rackets, he doesn't bleed drama. And in a sport built on personalities, that makes him inconvenient. So they keep trying to mold him into a counterweight, into a fire starter, into something he isn't. Because in this era, you're not allowed to just play. You have to become part of a myth. Every tournament, an audition not for greatness, but for approval. But how do you create authentic rivalries? He wins more than he loses. But still, every stumble becomes a referendum on who he's not, when the only thing anyone really wants is to go back. But when he loses, suddenly, everyone has something to say. This is the curse of playing in the aftermath of legends. Still, it's never enough. He wins in straight sets. Too mechanical. He dismantles a top seed. Lacked emotion. He hoists a trophy. But is he the future of tennis? The praise is muted, not measured. Always conditional. But the criticism? You have to bleed on the court and cry off of it. Doesn't curse the gods or kiss the logo. Because Sinner doesn't just play for himself. Every match is a trial. Every swing, a statement. Approval from crowds who fell in love with Federer's tears. From analysts who miss Nadal's grit. From fans who measure players not by their success, but by their ability to make them feel. And that's the cruel part. Jannik is doing everything right. He trains like a soldier. He plays like an assassin. He loses a 5-set thriller, no heart. He goes down to Alcaraz, not a leader. He falls short at a slam, not ready. And yet, when he fights through injury, when he rallies from 2 sets down, when he puts on clinics with surgical precision, the world yawns. It's like he's playing with the volume down, because in this new era, you don't just have to win. You have to entertain. You have to perform. But Jannik doesn't crack, doesn't crumble. He wins with his head down. He loses with his jaw clenched. He keeps moving forward, and maybe that's what unsettles them most. Because the tennis world has learned to love its heroes loud, their agony, their triumphs, their poetry. But Sinner doesn't offer a script. He offers silence, and silence. In a sport addicted to noise, it's mistaken for absence. So even when he wins, it feels like he's losing. Not the match, but the crowd. Some players are born heroes. Others are cast as villains. But what happens to the ones in between? That's the quiet tragedy of Jannik Sinner. He's too composed to be worshipped, too respectful to be hated, too calm to be controversial. In a sport that thrives on emotional extremes, he exists in the quiet middle, a place that doesn't make headlines, doesn't trend, doesn't sell. Each had a role, a mythos, a place in the emotional architecture of tennis. Federer was beloved, not just for how he played, but for who he became. Nadal, respected for his fire. Djokovic, feared for his relentlessness. But Jannik, he's still undefined, and that's dangerous. And if you don't give them a clear narrative to attach to, you become forgettable. Because in this era, identity is currency. Fans don't just watch matches, they pick sides. They defend legacies. They invest emotionally. Sinner has no scandal, no drama, no flashpoint. He doesn't rage against the system. He doesn't crumble under pressure. He doesn't sell his pain for applause. Even today's rising stars come prepackaged with personality. Alcaraz, the joyful phantom. Kyrgios, the rebel. Medvedev, the cerebral disruptor. He just plays. But in a sport that has become entertainment, just playing is no longer enough. Not because he lacks greatness, but because he hasn't even been allowed to own a story that is truly his. The silent lane. The player who might be great. Every great tennis figure comes with a story. Federer, the graceful genius. Nadal, the warrior king. Djokovic, the outsider who broke the mold. Because he doesn't represent a movement. He doesn't break a mold. He doesn't scratch the itch left by Federer's farewell. Not dramatic. Enough to inspire fierce loyalty. He's not a symbol. He's a statistic. And in a world obsessed with emotional gravity, that leaves him floating. But somewhere along the way, buried under comparisons, drowned in nostalgia, sidelined by louder stars, he began to vanish. And Sinner? Doesn't he know how to feel for a player who doesn't he beg to be seen? Analysts struggle to define him. Broadcasters grasp for angles. Fans remain distant, still improving, still winning. Because he spent years trying to prove something, trying to be enough. But enough was never his to define. But the spotlight rarely lingers. The headlines rarely stick. One of the only names top seeds hope to avoid. But even when he strikes, it feels like a whisper. And the roars? They're always louder for someone else. He's trapped between nostalgia and novelty. Not old enough to be revered. Not flashy enough to go viral. And maybe he feels it too. That unspoken truth: he could win a slam tomorrow and still not shift the conversation. The one who doesn't demand your love but earns your respect. He's the middle ground, but never loved like a legend. And in the world of tennis, that difference is everything. At some point, you stop chasing shadows. But what if that's not him? What if the real tragedy isn't that Sinner can't become the next Federer, but that he was never allowed to be the first Sinner and start becoming one? That's the strange evolution Jannik Sinner finds himself in. He entered the sport as a prodigy, a quiet storm, the next big thing. Not in performance, in perception. He's still climbing. And so, he begins to slip into something more dangerous than failure: invisibility. Because the world of post-Federer tennis doesn't know what to do with subtlety. It doesn't know how to cheer for discipline. So Jannik becomes the ghost, quiet, present, haunting. He stalks tournaments like a specter, dangerous, but ignored. One of the few who can end careers in 3 clinical sets. And he knows it. There's a hollowness to the wins, a weight to the silence. The sport keeps asking him to be louder, flashier, more dramatic. What if all this time, the world wasn't waiting for a new legend? It was just refusing to let the last one go. That's the truth no one says out loud. Maybe the game doesn't need another ghost. Maybe it just wants the old one back. And Jannik, he is left chasing something that doesn't exist anymore. Validation in a world that isn't he. Listening. He's not broken. He's not bitter. He's just alone. And that loneliness, it echoes through empty applause. It hides behind trophies held high with no tears, no chaos, no myth, just silence. But maybe that's where his power lives now, in becoming the player who doesn't need to be remembered to keep winning. Maybe the next legend is the one who stops trying to be one.